So Anthony Yarde defeats Stefani Koykov in this tune-up before his world title attempt against Artur Beterbiev at the back end of January 2023. The fight will be in the UK. I might be in a minority in saying this, but I actually think that if Anthony Yarde could tighten up his defense, then he would actually have a chance against Artur Beterbiev, because I think that his offense is actually quite impressive. But when I say if he can tighten up his defense, that's a very big if, because some fighters try their whole careers to tighten up their defense without success. It's not something you can necessarily fix overnight. And the reason I mention his defense is because in this fight against Koykov, he was actually caught clean several times in the first 2 rounds against a completely overmatched, overpowered, undersized opponent. If this guy's catching you clean like that so early, it isn't a good sign when your next fight in just a couple months is against Artur Beterbiev, because if Beterbiev is catching you with those kind of shots, you might find yourself in very serious trouble very quickly. So Anthony Yarde's defense does not fill me with a lot of confidence when he's going in there against Beterbiev. But his offense, if he can get the kind of shots off on Beterbiev that we've seen him deliver on many other opponents, I'll be very interested to see how Beterbiev deals with it, because I think Anthony Yarde does punch quite well. He's not an Adonis Stevenson, Sergey Kovalev, or even Artur Beterbiev level puncher. I haven't seen any evidence of that, but he can punch, and he's fast, he's athletic, he's a good combination puncher, he's got good punch selection, he's got good balance. So there's definitely talent there. Obviously, he's lacking in terms of the amateur background, and that's, I think, the biggest issue for Anthony Yarde, is without that grounding, he's going in there against much more experienced guys who have seen the likes of him, people with athletic gifts, etc., many, many times before. So they know exactly what to do. Whereas with Anthony Yarde, he's in uncharted territory all the time. So that's one of the issues for him. But as I say, he does have talent, and if he can impose it on Beterbiev, then I wouldn't rule anything out. But you would imagine, from a standpoint of probabilities, it would be Beterbiev landing his big shots on Yarde before Yarde lands any of his shots on Beterbiev, in which case you'd have to go with Artur Beterbiev, right? We saw Anthony Yarde get stopped by Sergey Kovalev, and that was late in the fight when he'd taken a lot of punishment. But Kovalev really wasn't landing his big right hands on Anthony Yarde. He controlled that fight behind the jab and ultimately finished the fight with a jab. It really wasn't about Kovalev landing big right hands and the kind of shots that he was hitting people with in his prime. But with Artur Beterbiev, I think there'll be a lot more of his power shots that come into play against Yarde, and Yarde better watch out for that. What I will say, however, is that I think Sergey Kovalev has actually got a better jab than Artur Beterbiev. Beterbiev's got a good jab, but for my money, Kovalev's jab was better. And I know, or I certainly feel, there are other areas of Sergey Kovalev's game that are not as good as Beterbiev. But when it comes to the jab, I think that's where he has one advantage over Beterbiev. I think Kovalev's jab was better, and therefore I don't think, or at least I suspect, Beterbiev won't be able to control Yarde on the outside to the same extent that Kovalev did with just the jab. I think that Beterbiev will have to use more punches, more power shots in order to control Yarde, if he chooses to fight that way, because Beterbiev, as we've seen, can fight in several different ways. He can do the seek and destroy Golovkin thing, but he can also box on the back foot. We saw that even though it was a short fight against Joe Smith. Walk Joe Smith onto shots. So it's going to be interesting to see which style, which strategy he employs against Anthony Yarde. But if he chooses to box at range and allow Yarde to be the aggressor, I think he'll be more available than Sergey Kovalev was. Even though Kovalev and Beterbiev are a similar height, Kovalev just seems more rangy to me. And I just think his jab is a bit better at keeping opponents at bay than Artur Beterbiev's jab. So that means that Yarde might find, as I say, more opportunities to actually let his hooks and uppercuts and fast combinations go against Beterbiev than he found against Kovalev, who just literally nullified almost everything Yarde was doing by just keeping him on the end of this consistent, relentless, solid jab for 11 rounds until that same jab ended the fight. And it was only really the 8th round where Yarde had some serious success, and it looked like he might be able to take Kovalev out, but Kovalev weathered the storm, and Yarde, of course, at that point had emptied the tank under Tunde Ajayi's instruction, and he was therefore a sitting duck for Kovalev after that 8th round, really. And that's when he got worn down and taken out. But yeah, like I say, I see it as being a different kind of fight than the Kovalev fight. I don't think it will be Yarde frozen out of the pocket at the end of a jab the whole night. I think it'll be more explosive than that. I think there'll be more power shots thrown by Beterbiev, and Yarde will get the chance to throw his shots in exchange. But again, if you look at the defense of both guys, and it's not like Beterbiev has got the greatest defense in the world, but he's defensively astute. He knows how to avoid being hit in certain situations, how to walk guys on. Again, we saw it against Joe Smith Jr. in his last fight. So he's very clever, Artur Beterbiev, and he has the experience over Anthony Yarde. So again, if you're a gambling man, then you would have to go with Artur Beterbiev unless you want to take a punt on Anthony Yarde. I don't know what the odds are. But if you want the safe thing, then it's going to be Artur Beterbiev, depending on the kind of price you can get. But it wouldn't totally shock me if Anthony Yarde pulled off an upset. It wouldn't totally shock me because he does have some talent there. And he isn't going to be on the end of a jab, I don't think, in my estimation. Or at least not to the extent that he was against Kovalev. He'll have more opportunities to exchange and let his shots go. I know people are still very critical of the job Tunde Ajayi has done with Anthony Yarde and even Frank Warren, because aside from Lyndon Arthur, everybody who Anthony Yarde has fought outside of world title fights has pretty much been a pie. There hasn't been any opposition of any caliber at all outside of Lyndon Arthur. And of course, how good is Lyndon Arthur? Is he European level? Is he really a world level fighter, Lyndon Arthur? I don't know. Maybe he's European level. Some people might even go as far as saying he's only British level. Other than that, Anthony Yarde has just been fighting cream puffs. And to be fair to this guy, Stefani Koykov, he came to give it a go. He didn't come to lay down. He did want to actually win. But he was, as I said earlier on, totally outmatched, outgunned, undersized, and I think he was convinced of that himself by the time he went down in the 3rd round because he took a knee and he didn't get back up. So, yeah, this guy had some ambition when he went in there, but this is the level of opponent that Yarde's been fighting the whole time. Outside of his world title tilt against Kovalev and the Lyndon Arthur fights. And so the idea is that if he'd been brought along in a more traditional way, by stepping him up incrementally, then he might be a better fighter by now. Anthony Yarde is in his 30s now. He's like 32, 31, 32. And he's had, is he over 20 fights at this point? If he'd been brought along in a more traditional way, gradually stepping up and stepping him up before putting him in at world level, he might be more rounded now. He might have the experience that he needs. And I'm talking about winning experiences, because he does have a losing experience against Kovalev that he might be able to learn from. But you can also learn from your winning experiences. You take Tyson Fury. He officially beat John McDermott twice, although the first fight was very controversial. But in those very tough wins, he would have learned a tremendous amount. Even in the Steve Cunningham fight, Tyson Fury would have learned a tremendous amount. He picked up very, very valuable experience in those fights. Anthony Yarde hasn't really had anything like that. He's had these easy fights, and then he's thrown in against Kovalev. I mean, it's weird. Do you know what I mean? I was talking to somebody in the Element group about Yarde, and they were saying that Yarde claims he doesn't really watch boxing, or he doesn't really watch, the other light heavyweights like Bivol and these people. And I've commented in the past about fighters like James Kirtland who have said similar, even Berman Stavern saying they don't watch people fight, they don't really watch boxing like that. And normally that's a red flag. But in the case of Anthony Yarde, I suspect the reason he doesn't like watching Bivol and all these other guys fight, if that's even true, because, sometimes fighters just lie or whatever. But if that's true, I suspect the reason for it might be Anthony Yarde's lack of experience. Because if he's constantly watching Bivol and Beterbiev and all these other light heavyweights, he might start to hyper-focus on all their strengths. And because he doesn't have the experience they have, that might start chipping away at his confidence, thinking, oh yeah, but this guy's so fast or he's so powerful and he's been doing this for so many years against all these experienced guys and he's got hundreds of amateur fights, and all these doubts can start circulating in your mind. So the approach with Yarde seems to be, and Tunde, is to just focus on Anthony, not have him focus on these other fighters, but focus on himself. Because that way he won't get too spooked by what the opponents are doing well, So that's what I suspect is going on with Anthony Yarde, saying that he doesn't really watch Bivol and all these other guys. He's focused on himself and focused on, I guess, whoever the opponent is that he's going to fight next. Anyway, I'll leave it on that. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got an Element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, is decentralized, and is 100% censorship free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.